Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Stephen. I'm a traditionally published fantasy author. Today I'm talking about editing, in particular the phases that I do on an edit when I'm working on a book. It's quite apt at the moment because, as has been recently announced, I have a new series that starts next year. The first book, The Judas Blossom, comes out on the 11th of July 2023 and it's available to pre-order now, links below. However, I've just received the first draft back from my editor with her notes, and now I'm going to go through a bunch of different phases on editing the book based upon her feedback and things I have to do, but also other things I've done in general. But this can also kind of work that if you're working on a book and you're getting ready to submit it to an agent in the future, if you're looking at the traditional publishing route, you could use some of these different methods, some of these different techniques to improve your first draft, to get it to a second draft, or at least move it on to the point where you're happy with it and you're then ready to submit the book. So I've already done some of these phases on the book, but I think it'll help you in general just to kind of explore them, find out about how I do it. You don't have to do all of them. There'll be other techniques that other people use, but this is just to give you some basics on what you could do to edit your first draft and make it better and hopefully a more polished second draft. The first thing you need to do once you finish that first draft is take a break. Now I know some people are like, oh well, you know, I'm getting older, or I want to get the book out there and I want to make sure, you know, and things are moving on, and whether it's going to move out the zeitgeist and all the rest of it. All of those things are valid, but by the same token, you're too close to the book. You spent so much time immersed in it that you can't actually see things very clearly, to the point where if someone else reads the book, it's very easy for them to spot things that you've completely missed. Whether it's an editor or a friend or just someone glancing at it, they can spot things that you just can't see anymore because you've been reading the same words over and over and over again. And also, not everything on the page is there. There's some stuff still in your head, because I've done this before. Like, an editor's come to me and said, oh, what's this character about? Well, I don't understand their motivation. I'm thinking, well, it's obvious, it's there. But when I go back and read what's actually on the page, it's not there. There's not enough information to justify what I said this character is about, because some of it's still locked up in my brain. And tying into last week's video where I talked about the realities of being a traditionally published author and being in the mid-list in particular, you got to remember that this is a business and agents are professionals, and if you send in a book to them that has some very glaring errors, enough that they can't get past them, they'll just say no thank you, or they'll just delete it and move on. And that does sound harsh and that does sound uncomfortable and it's not very nice, but equally you don't want to make some of those amateurish errors. You want them to read the book, and if they don't like it and they're not interested in the book, it's based upon the story and the style and the way you've told the story and that particular story, not on the fact that there's some really huge gaps in the story, nothing makes sense, there's loads of spell mistakes, the punctuation's terrible. All of these things you can control. You should do the best with what you can control, and the other things you kind of have to accept that you can't control, like the fact that agents have individual taste, and if agent A isn't particularly interested in a book and they can't get behind it and they don't want to champion it, they'll pass on it, whereas agent B loves it, it's exactly what they're looking for, that's what's missing on their list, it's perfect fit for them. You can't control any of that, so focus on the stuff that you can control, and that's editing the book within an inch of its life. Remember, once you get an agent, you might do some more editing with the book with them, which I have done in the past and other friends have as well. And then once you get a publisher, you'll then go through a number of edits again, the different stages. I've done a video about that. I'll put a link here. But you still have to do your best. Now, I know, there's all that work still ahead once you've got an agent and once you've got a publisher. But you still have to get the book into as good shape as you can. Small things they will overlook. Editors and agents are very forgiving to a point. If you've made a couple of tiny things, little things, they can overlook them. They want to know that you're a good storyteller. You can tell interesting stories. It has a good hook. And, there's something intriguing about it, and that you're a good person, be someone who'll be nice to work with and a pleasant person. All of those things you can control, and that's what you need to focus on. So as I said, first thing, take a break. Take some time off. Don't do any reading or writing or editing on this book at all. Walk away and do something completely different. Spend time watching TV, films, exercise, go on holiday. Just do stuff that isn't writing on that book. If you want to write something else, you can. I wouldn't suggest it, but some people do. And maybe take 2 weeks minimum a break. If you want longer, great. Just to kind of recharge your batteries, do that. Then come back and read the book through from start to finish. That would be my second kind of stage. Because by the time you got to the end of that first draft, the beginning is a long way away. You know, it's months, possibly a couple of years away. And you'll be able to see the flaws a lot more clearly on the beginning. You may not have read the start of the book since you first wrote it, however long ago that was. And even someone like me who plans their books, I know the shape of the book, I have all the milestones, I know the beginning, the middle, and the end, and I have creative leaps between certain points that I don't know until I start writing. That's where the exciting part comes for me when I'm working on a book. Some of these leaps will work and some of them won't. And on that second read through of the book, I can start to see the shape of the book a lot better. Does it make sense? Does it hang together? So as you read through, I tend to make very small tweaks and edits. This isn't a deep edit, this is just little things, like if I spot typos or punctuation, I tweak them. If there's little words here and there that I'm not completely happy with, I could have phrased a little bit better, I tweak them. But mostly I'm focused on getting to the end of that book and seeing, is it the book that I wanted to write? Because even with planning stuff, sometimes the shape of the book can change. Sometimes I think I know the characters, I've set them out in my mind in a certain way, but in the process of writing them, something has changed. So then I start making notes about things I want to go back and look at. But I don't focus on it right then. I just want to get to the end of that book and then take a bit of time and think about the book and say, right, is it what I wanted? Is it feeling like the book, the kind of story that I wanted? And if not, what big changes do I need to make, and write them down? Third stage is crutch words. I asked on Twitter a bunch of writers, what crutch words do they have? What phrases do they use? What particular words do they repeat over and over? Sometimes it's something that we use in common language, just day to day, when you're talking to your friends, and that can trickle into the book. Sometimes it's just certain particular words that repeat over and over and over. And sometimes it can be adjectives that you want to strip out. I'm not one of these people who say you shouldn't have any adjectives. I think some are useful, but if you have the same one too often, it can start to feel like a crutch. But there are other words, like sometimes. Don't always need to have that. Or a little. Or almost. Or seems. Some other people had things like actually. People use that too often sometimes. They just kind of keep using it over and over. Some people start dialogue with well. I went through my book and had a look, and I'd done that a few times because it's something I tend to do when I'm talking. So is another one at the beginning of dialogue. Why do we do that? It's instead of saying you wouldn't have that in a book, you wouldn't have that in dialogue, but you have these kind of beats, these pauses that you can put in. And there are other certain words. Go through and just try and strip out some of these things to make it clearer. It's not that you can't have any of them, but it's just a case of, do you need it there? What is it doing? What is it adding to the sentence? Does it make it more concise? Does it make it a more powerful phrase or sentence or emotion if you strip out some of these crutch words and just bring it a bit tighter, bring it a bit neater? And you'll be surprised. You can do, if you're on Word, like me, Microsoft Word, you can do a quick search and find all, and it'll tell you how many you've got of those words. And sometimes it's a bit shocking. You can go through and just trying to find them, like despite might be another one, or seems to, or little things like this. Think about it, look up through your book, see what you can find, see if you start repeating certain things. Do they need to be there? And strip them out and tighten up the core of the book a bit. This next phase is something that I do, but I don't know if many others do this. Even though I plan all my books and I know where I'm going, I need to have a picture of the whole book for me, just for me. So what I do is I take a piece of paper, you can do it on the computer if you want, and I have a bullet list. I put the name of the character, if it's one character per chapter, and on one line only, I write what is happening in that chapter. So I keep it as precise as possible. I boil it down to someone's fighting this, emotional beat is this, and just keep it really lean. And I do that for the whole book, because that allows me to see the pattern of the book there again. Sometimes if you have more than one point of view and you're repeating it and you can see the pattern and it follows very often, in the same sort of, ABC on 3 characters. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you need to change that. Sometimes you need to add something in to create a little bit of breath, a little bit of a beat. Sometimes it just gets too repetitive, or it's slowing things down, and you can strip some chapters out. This allows me to have the whole book on sort of 2 pages and look at the patterns. Some people do this on Scrivener and other tools with little kind of digital whiteboards and white cards, and they can create flow charts and all this kind of stuff. This is a very basic, very sort of simple paper and pen way to do it, and it works for me. Try and do something like that if you want. It'll show you the shape of the book. It'll give you a kind of objective view, bird's eye view, to look back down at the book and say, right, what's going on, what's happening, does that chapter work, does it need to be there, can I move this here, can I move it there, what if I merge this one with that one, does that make it better, is the beginning too slow, where's the climax, is it up and down, or is it just constantly building in tension? That's a kind of bird's eye view thing I like to do. The next phase that I go through in the book is character arcs. I know the shape of the story, I know the shape of the characters, but as I said, sometimes things can change and morph a little. So what I do is I read through all of the chapters that feature that one character, just that one character, so I can see that the arc of the character across the book. Where are they at the beginning? What happens to them? What kind of trials and things do they go through? And how are they at the end of the book? And is it what I wanted them to do? Sometimes you have a situation in a chapter and you've written it and they react a certain way, and on looking back at it across the whole of the story, I can think, actually, at this stage, I want them to be a bit more forthright. They're a bit too meek at this point. If they're building to become someone a bit more empowered and they're trying to grow and have more agency, then actually I want to see a bit more glimmers early on. So have them speak up a bit, and it changes the scene a little bit. And that allows me to craft the character in a particular way. Then I go through the book on the next character and do the same thing, and the next character, and so on, if you have multiple points of view. Obviously, if you've only got a single point of view, it's a lot harder to do that because it's only ever one person. But I don't know how you would do that, to be honest. Probably a similar sort of thing, but that makes you have to read the whole book again. But character, focus on the character, look at what's going on, see if it works, and then see how they interact with each other. Because once you've rejigged one character, if you have them talking to another character, does it need to change how they respond to one another? Or are you happy with it? The next phase after that is dialogue. I go and look at the dialogue throughout the whole book. Sometimes I will read it aloud, and in doing so, I can hear it a lot better than it is on the page, even though I've written it, and I've written it in such a way that I want it conversational. I'm not someone who writes really purple prose or really flowery. I want the dialogue in a fantasy book, for me, to feel realistic to the region or the area or the world. So I never use modern words. I never use okay or yeah or modern phrases like that. Some fantasy writers do. I don't. I don't think it works. It pulls me out of the story. And if I'm trying to immerse the reader in this world and get them to believe in some of this weird stuff that I've created, I think modern language is a bit of a barrier because it brings them out of the story and brings them into our world. And I'm trying to get them to completely immerse themselves in this. Some people are totally fine with it, so go with your gut, go with your preference, but dialogue, do a full dialogue sweep, read it out loud, listen to it, talk back and forth. And also you can work on voice of particular characters. Do they have a particular way of talking? Now, not every character has to be totally unique. Some people say you should be able to read any line of dialogue in a book and know which character is saying it. I don't think that's actually true. I think that's really hard to do. If you can do it, well done. But I don't think that's possible for most writers. There are some authors that have such distinct voices of characters that it's easier, but even then it's not absolutely you're always going to know. So the most obvious one I can think of is Joe Abercrombie. If you read a character like Glockter and you hear it in a dialogue and a piece of conversation that he has, I can probably tell you him versus someone else, but I wouldn't be able to tell you who any of the other characters are, just because this character has such a unique way of thinking and his style and all the rest of it. But the others, I probably couldn't do that. So look at voice, look at dialogue, look at style, read it aloud, try and make it as realistic as possible to fit within the world. If you have a very archaic style within your book on purpose, focus on that, do some research, see if how they talked in the past. You don't have to make it completely accurate because, of course, this is a fantasy book. You decide that. If certain words stick in your throat when you're reading them from the old style, then just gloss over them and make them a bit more modern. You want the reader to believe this stuff. You don't want them to be tripping over complicated words and phrases. The next phase is one that I don't actually do, but some people I know have done this. They will change the font of the entire book. When you read the same words over and over and over again, you become a bit word blind. I especially do on books. And sometimes people say, how can typos slip through unpublished books? Because all of us are human, we all make mistakes, and if you read the thing 20, 30 times, after a while it's really hard to see what's on the page. So one trick is to take the whole book and change the font into something different from, Courier to Times New Roman or whatever it is. It doesn't have to stay in that font forever. It's just the idea of, if you tweak the font, if you change it, visually it can trick your brain into believing that it's something slightly different. And then read the whole book again. Now, one thing that some people do this is what I don't do, is they read the entire book out loud. You're not going to do the audiobook yourself, most likely, unless you're self-publishing it and you want to particularly do it, but reading the book aloud sometimes can help you with the structure of sentences, with the punctuation. I will do that if I'm writing something and I can't quite get it right, or when I'm editing it doesn't work. I will read what I've written out loud and the punctuation falls in naturally, but sometimes I'll feel where I'm stumbling, or I'll break it into two shorter sentences, and that works a lot better. If you want to do the full read through, that can help, but obviously that's completely optional. The next phase is something you should do, absolutely, if possible, with someone local or online or wherever you can get someone who will read the book for you, but have someone else read your book from start to finish. If you can get multiple people to read it, beta readers, then do so. But go in with a set number of questions for them. Things that you're worried about, things that you want to know. Ask them who their favourite character is and why. All of these certain things that you're worried about, or you want them to be interested in, or you want them to focus on as a reader. Does the magic system work? Can you describe the world very clearly? Does it feel realistic? Did you stumble over any sections? Were there any bits that you skipped because it was particularly boring? What did you like? What did you dislike? And get as much feedback as you can. And obviously, if patterns then start to develop from a group of readers, hopefully 3 readers or more, you can then start to work on those things and do another draft. See if any of the things make sense. Obviously, if 6 people come back and all of their feedback is completely different, that's a lot harder. But if multiple readers mention the same thing, then you must address them. It might be that you know something that they don't because this is the first book of a series, or there's other stuff that's going to come later on that they don't know. That's fine, you can ignore those things. But if they say, I kind of skimmed this bit because the battle seemed to go on forever, then maybe you need to tighten it, maybe you need to shorten it and make it a bit more punchy and a bit more visceral. Or they might say, the start was a bit slow, but once it got going I really enjoyed it, in which case you need to tighten up the beginning. Something's not working. Can you take out a chapter? Look at that beat sheet that I mentioned where there's a bullet for every chapter. Can you move some of them around? Can you take something out? Can you merge something to make the beginning faster, to get the reader more interested and more invested in the book and get them on board, so they don't say, oh, once it got going, you want them to be hooked from the first chapter. Now, that isn't to say chapter 1 has to have, the kind of thing that you talk about, a gunshot, a murder, but something must happen in that first chapter to make them interested. It could be a murder, it could be an emotional beat, but it could be the main hook of the story, but something must happen in that first chapter. If you say it gets really good from chapter 5 onwards, or the story gets going from, you've already lost the reader, and you've probably lost the agent as well, because when you send it to an agent, they usually ask for the first 3 chapters, 5 chapters, or 5,000 words, or whatever it might be. If you haven't hooked the agent and you haven't hooked the reader fairly soon, then you need to go back and work on it again. And with an agent, you only get one chance. This is why you should get feedback from other people and you should listen to it. Some people will go and get a professional edit. I haven't done that on any of my books. Some people I know, before they went and submitted it to an agent to be traditionally published, did. And there again, if you want to do that and you have the money to do that, fine, go for it, but it is not necessary. But if you do that, please listen to the editor's notes. Please listen to what they're saying. And I hate getting criticism in my book. I hate getting edits, I'll admit it. But sometimes you have to look at the notes and look what's behind the note. What are they actually saying? If they say, I don't understand this, or I don't like this character, is that good? Did you want them to hate this character? Or if you want them to like this character, what's not working? And dig a little deeper and find out. And revise the book based upon all of this feedback and whip it into shape and make it punchy and exciting and grip the reader from the beginning as fast as you can. Just a little note following on from that. I've just talked about pace and making the reader interested very soon. Yes, there are some books that are naturally slower, that take time to build, that explore things, and that's perfectly fine. However, by the same token, the market is more crowded than ever before. As I said in my previous video last week, being a middle-list author is a tough business. So if you're trying to interest an agent and then a publisher, you want to make your book relatively lean. Now, some debut fantasy books are massive, yes, science fiction the same, and predominantly I'm talking about science fiction and fantasy because that's what I write. But if you look across most fiction genres, the biggest books out there tend to be fantasy and some sci-fi books. Most of them don't come anywhere near the word count of some of the huge science fiction fantasy books. But also, if you're a debut author, it will be an easier sell if you sell them a shorter series and your debut book is a lot shorter. If you go in with a 400,000 word book and you say it's the first of 7, then they're probably not going to take it, just because that's a huge investment for them. It's a massive amount of editing. It's 400,000 words is ridiculous, and they'd want you to cut that down most often. Yes, there are exceptions. I know this. But why create an even bigger hurdle for yourself? Now, it's not to say you can't write interesting books, you can't write longer books, but to begin with, if you're trying to build a readership, get yourself known, have a name, going in with a shorter book, 100,000, 120,000 words, you stand a much better chance with a standalone or a duology or a trilogy than if you go in with a massive tome of a book that is a really long series. If you go in with this phrase in your covering letter, which is kind of key at the moment, standalone with series potential, that's what they want to hear. Because if you go in and say, this is an adventure, boom, great, love it, and people say, we want this is fantastic, I want more, then you can go and do more stories set within that world. And that will work very, very well. If you go in with first book and it connects to 7 others, I think you're barking up the wrong tree. The final stage, after you've had feedback from people who've read your book, beta readers, after you revised that book, the final stage is a proofread. Now, when I work on my books from the publisher, typically I get a physical copy sent to me. This is the book of how it'll look on the page, with the page numbers and my name at the top of every page and so on, and how it'll be laid out on a book, 2 sides, on one piece of paper. And I will then go through and look for spelling and punctuation only. Doing it on screen is a lot tougher, but obviously you don't want to print out a whole bunch of stuff if you don't need to, because there's so many dead trees and so on, unless you can recycle it and stuff. But go through and do a proofread. Look for typos, look for spelling mistakes, look for things that don't work. And at this stage, I kind of feel like when I'm doing this final revision, I'm moving the deck chairs around on the Titanic, which is a phrase I use quite often. Because it means I'm not actually changing the shape of the story at this point. I'm not changing the course of the book. It is still the book that I'm sending to them. At this point, I'm just tweaking little tiny things. And you have to do a proofread of your book when you are traditionally published anyway. It goes through a number of edits, and then the final stage is the proofread anyway. You want to spend a good chunk of time on this phase though and get it right, because glaring spelling mistakes and typos will stand out in your covering letter and in your work to an agent. And this is something you can control. This is something that you can get absolutely right. So go through it slowly, be meticulous, be careful. If you're not sure on something, get someone else to give their opinion of it. Some of it I still get wrong, some of it I still have to rework when it comes back from various edits, that's fine. But take your time, do the proofread. The final stage, if you want, is to do another read through. At this point, I'm kind of sick of the book. I've read it so many times, I've been working on it for months, I just want it out the door. But that's when mistakes can creep in. If you can do a final read through, go for it. If not, it's ready. Now you do your covering letter, now you do synopsis based upon everything you set up. And equally, if you've got that beat sheet of what happens in every chapter, that can help you with the synopsis a little bit because you can see the shape of the book. And the synopsis is not chapter 1 happens, then chapter 2 happens, then chapter 3. But you can see what the book is about, and the synopsis is sort of higher level, but it explores the whole of the book, the themes, and it gives everything away. And that can kind of help you. That's a little bit sort of like a cheat sheet in a way. You don't have to try and think it through and keep it all in your brain. You can refer to this document. So that's it. Those are all the phases that I go through on a book. It can take months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. It takes as long as it takes. You should get it right. You should be patient. Take little breaks between some of the phases if you need to recharge your batteries, to have a rest of your eyes, and then come back and attack it again. Polish it and polish it and polish it, and then send it out. Keep your fingers crossed, but know that you've done the best that you can. If you do a half-assed job and you send it out, then you've shot yourself in the foot. So be patient, take your time, do as many phases and as many revisions as you need. And once you get to that phase where you feel like, I'm not actually changing anything anymore, I'm just kind of changing contractions to both words again and putting them back, at that point it's done. It's ready as it's ever going to be. Send it out, and you just have to keep your fingers crossed then, because you've done everything that's within your control. So hopefully that's useful for you, giving you an idea of some of the phases that I go through and some other writers do as well. That's all I'm going to talk about for today, but I'll be back next week with another video.